All right, let's do a few questions from readers. Our first question comes in asking if it's recommended to save 20% of your salary a year toward retirement. There's a couple of questions about that. The first is, what if your salary is $240,000, so that 20% would be $48,000 a year, and you can put 18 into a 403b and 11,000 into spousal and individual backdoor Roth IRAs. Where's that additional 19,000 supposed to go? And this is actually a really common question I get. I get this all the time, and in fact, I wrote a blog post about it in December 2017. Basically, the answer when you've filled out all your available retirement accounts and you need to invest more is that you do it inside a taxable account. And it's okay to save for retirement in a taxable or non-qualified account. It's not like you don't get any tax advantages for doing that. When you sell stuff that you've owned for at least a year, you get the lower capital gains rates on any gains that you've had there. And when you get out qualified dividends from those investments, those are also taxed at a lower dividends rate. And so there are some advantages to investing in a taxable account. It's not as good as investing in retirement accounts, but once you've maxed those out, what choice do you have? You don't. And so you have to invest in a taxable account. And the second part of his question was, if you're saving 20% of your salary toward retirement, does that mean that part of that 20 goes towards student loans and savings for a house down payment, or is that an additional savings above and beyond that? Well, the truth is it's above and beyond that. You need 20% just for retirement. Anything for college or to pay off your own student loans or to save up for a housing down payment or a boat or a car or whatever else you're saving for is above and beyond 20%. Now, that's not a hard and fast 20%, but that's the neighborhood you need to be in. You know, 15% might be fine if you start saving early, or you got some other advantage like a pension, or if you're willing to work a long time, or you don't need that much money in retirement. But 5% is not adequate. It's simply too low. You've got to get up there around 20%. And that's where high-income professionals need to be to have the type of retirement they want to have. All right, our next question comes from someone asking about podcast number 12. I really enjoy your podcast and was listening to podcast number 12. And at the end, I noticed you mentioned starting a business doing something like online surveys so you could open an individual 401k. So this reader noticed that although the question I was answering was about backdoor Roth IRAs, it made him wonder if it would be beneficial for him to start a business, as I do a lot of surveys online and as a consultant and make about $6,500 a year doing that, all as 1099 income. This doc's an employed doc, already maxing out 403Bs, 457s, HSAs, 529s, and investing in taxable, both in index funds and in real estate. This doc also happens to make about $18,000 a year as an independent contractor for another company, and owns a little bit of a hearing center, it sounds like, although that doesn't sound like it's earned income. And so this doc was basically wondering, well, is there another retirement account available to me? And yes, there is. It's called an individual 401k. Even though you may have a 403b or a 457 or a 401k at your employed job, you also can open an individual 401k. Now, the amount that you can put in there is dependent on how much you earn at the job. And basically, if you're using your entire employee contribution at your main gig, you're only going to be able to put in about 20% of your 1099 income into the individual 401k. So if you're only making $5,000, you're only going to be able to put $1,000 in there. If you're making $20,000, you might be able to put $4,000 in there. And so the more you make at the side gig, the more you can put in there. But for some people, that's not the point of the individual 401k. The point isn't to try to get a whole bunch of money into there. The point is to give them some place to roll a big traditional IRA or SEP IRA that they may have that is preventing them from doing the backdoor Roth IRA. So that gives them something they can roll that into. So say, for example, you had a $500,000 traditional IRA and you wanted to start doing the backdoor Roth IRA. Well, you wouldn't want to do that unless you got rid of that traditional IRA first, because the pro rata rule on the backdoor Roth IRA would screw you up. And so what you do is you figure out a way to open an individual 401k. And you don't need much income to do that. A few $100 from surveys is probably plenty. And then that allows you to be self-employed and thus get an employer identification number from the IRS and open up that individual 401k. You put, $50 in there from what you earned from your surveys, but you roll that $500,000 IRA in there, and now you can start doing backdoor Roth IRAs on the side. So that's what I was referring to in the previous podcast. But if you make a lot at the side gig, you can shelter even more money in the individual 401k as well. All right, our third question comes from another listener who says, one thing that I still haven't quite figured out is whether or not it's reasonable to consider some semi-necessary expenses as part of our emergency fund. And this doc and spouse have monthly payments of around $5,500 on student loans, and basically want to know, does our emergency fund need to include that $5,500 a month that we're paying towards student loans? Because that would be obviously a very large emergency fund, especially if you push that out to 6 months worth of your actual expenses. And so I think in these sorts of situations, it's important to inject a little bit of common sense into your emergency fund. Just because you're making payments of $5,500 a month doesn't mean your emergency fund needs to cover those payments. It should probably be enough to cover your required payments. And if your required payments, $1,000 a month, well, that amount probably ought to be baked into how large your emergency fund is. But if you're making all these optional payments, those don't have to be in your emergency fund. Now, if you've decided to get really aggressive about paying off your student loans, and you've got a 5-year loan, for instance, and you really are making these multi-$1,000 a month payments, maybe that's reasonable to have some of that in your emergency fund. But in a lot of ways, when you look at an emergency fund, the point of it is to help you avoid going into debt. When you're already in debt, you've kind of already had the emergency. And so I think it's okay to have a little bit smaller emergency fund and be dedicating those dollars toward paying off that debt as fast as you can. It just doesn't make any sense to me for somebody to have a $150,000 student loan and be carrying $60,000 as an emergency fund. Knock that down, $10,000, $20,000 maybe, and put the rest toward the student loans and help yourself get out of debt that much faster. If you listen to Dave Ramsey, his recommendation is nothing more than a $1,000 emergency fund until all your debt is paid off except your mortgage. And I think that would probably make a lot of physician families a little bit uncomfortable to have an emergency fund that small, but that's basically the idea, is you want to have a smaller emergency fund while you're trying to get rid of that debt, especially really high interest debt. And I think there's also some room for play there. Obviously, in that sort of a situation, when you have these other really great uses for your money, maybe a 6-month emergency fund isn't where you want to be. Maybe a 3-month or even a 2-month emergency fund is where you want to be. So I think you don't need to get too rigid about what an emergency fund is and isn't. The whole idea behind it is you need to have some money set aside that can take care of some things that come up without having you take on any additional debt. And, it's not money that you're trying to earn a great return on. And so you want to limit how much money is in that emergency fund. Now, at this point in my life, we keep about a 6-month emergency fund in a high-yield savings account. It only pays us 1% or maybe a little bit more right now. And so that's a reasonable thing for us to do because we don't have any debt. But if I owed somebody a bunch of money at 8%, I'd have a much smaller emergency fund than a 6-month of spending emergency fund. All right, this episode was sponsored by SoFi. Do you know how easy it is to start saving money on your student loans by refinancing? SoFi offers a free online application to refinance. As a leading student loan refinancing provider in the country, they've already helped over 10,000 doctors save $46,086 of interest on average on their student loans. They can help you too. There's no obligation or no fees to apply. Take 2 minutes to see your new low student loan interest rate on SoFi.com/whitecoat, and you could save tens of thousands of dollars on your student loans. As a member of the WCI community, you'll get $300 towards your student loan when you apply to refinance with SoFi. Now, medical residents can refinance their student loans with SoFi too and pay just $100 a month during their training. Apply today at SoFi.com/whitecoat. Remember that the special discount offer on the online course only lasts 1 more week, so sign up today. You don't have to complete it in a week. You just need to buy it in the next week. Head up, shoulders back. You can do this. We can help.